You're tuned in to Philly's #1 college radio station, WHIP.
Welcome back, everybody. 215-204-9449 is the number if you want to call and hang with us. This is Temple Sports Hour on Philly's #1 college radio station, WHIP. Let's go out to the phones right now as we'll head down to Florida and welcome in the beat reporter for the Philadelphia Phillies for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and that is my long-lost brother, which some people may say, in Matt Gelb. Matt, Zach Gelb, Haley Condon, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
I'm doing great. So is there any relationship between us? Because I was down at the Super Bowl, and I can't tell you, I was saying I'm from WHIP Radio, Temple University in Philadelphia, and so many people said, are you related to Matt?
Not that I know of. I have my younger brother also went to Temple. He just graduated recently, so there's a connection there. But no, I guess it's a strange coincidence, right?
Yeah, it's a very strange coincidence, and since we're now both working in the Philadelphia market, but if you ever want to come over for some Thanksgiving, we do serve lasagna in my portion of the Gelb family, so you're definitely more than welcome if you want to.
That sounds good.
Well, let's get to this. The Philadelphia Phillies, I was reading some stuff online. They have a lot of early arrivers at spring training. Who were some of the big names that arrived early?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Phillies official is saying that they counted about 45 players already in camp out of 61, and position players don't have to be here until Friday. And we're actually just watching Chase Utley take some ground balls and look more active than he did for much of last spring, maybe all of last spring. And a lot of big names already in camp. The pitchers and catchers had to be here today, so we saw Ryan Howard a little bit also. I mean, so most of the big names are already here, and then this team is eager to get going.
To me, Howard and Utley are the two biggest parts of this team. When you look at the offensive side of things, they're both coming off injuries, and I know they played well during the end of the season. Howard's average wasn't all that great. Utley, you mentioned his defensive problem. Right now, what do you get the feel of? Where's the confidence level with those two players as they head into the 2013 campaign?
I think both those guys will say they're confident now. We just won't really know until they get in the field. Remember, Utley hasn't played a spring training game in more than 2 years now, and Howard didn't get to play in spring at all last year. So I think the biggest thing will be for the Phillies to get them actually on the field in spring training. That's something they haven't been able to do, and it seems like such a minute thing, but I mean, just to get them on the field in spring training and have them get some spring training reps and get at bats, I mean, that will be huge, if these guys are going to be big players for them this year. And, Utley is going to be a thing that's going to linger the whole time. I mean, you just never know. His knees are a chronic problem, and it'll be interesting to see how he can manage it.
When you look at Ryan Howard, and I always know he's striked out a lot and his batting average hasn't always been great, but he's always been able to hit the long ball, which has been the most incredible part of this game. Have they been doing anything different this year to try to get Howard's batting average up a little bit? Have you been talking there, being in camp? Has there going to be a little bit different approach when they come to Howard this year in the cages?
They've always talked about selectivity with Howard, and when he is ahead in the count, he is not swinging at the right pitches. He's fooled by the breaking balls, and that's something they've been talking to him about for years and years. And Charlie Manuel said that he thinks that Ryan Howard could be a 300 hitter again, and for him to do that, he has to have better discipline at the plate. And that's something that they've tried to drill in him for years. And again, now last year he didn't have the chances to get those spring training at bats, and I'm guessing that that's going to be a major message for him. Now as he's able to get a full spring worth of work. To really work on being more selective. And his numbers against lefties were horrible last season, and that is something that definitely has to improve.
How do you like Michael Young fitting with this club, coming over, the long career with the Texas Rangers? How do you like him fitting with the Philadelphia Phillies?
I think there'll be a lot of questions about his defense. I think his offense, he did not have a good year last year. He had probably one of the worst years of his career, but this guy is a 300 hitter, and he led the American League in hits 2 years ago. It's not unreasonable to think that he could be a pretty good presence for them, near the top of the order, probably hitting second, maybe even hitting third if they put Utley second. I think the defense would be the big question because he has not played third base full-time in 2 years. He was mostly a DH last year, and that's going to be the big thing to watch in spring training.
Talking to a lot of fans this week as we're talking to Matt Gelb, who's on the hotline. 215-204-9449 is the number if you want to call and hang with us. Talking to a lot of fans on this show, the outfield, there's been some high expectations, there have been some low expectations. What do you like, what do you dislike about this outfield going into 2013?
A lot of questions. There's really impossible to know what's going to happen. I mean, you have Delman Young in right field. The Phillies want him to be the everyday right fielder, but he may not even be able to get into a spring training game until mid-March at the earliest. He had ankle surgery in the off season, and again, he's a guy who was a DH all last year, and he hasn't played right field in 5 years. So huge questions there. And then in left field, you've got Dominique Brown and you have Darren Ruff, two guys who've had very different prospect backgrounds. I mean, Dominique Brown was a top prospect, has been a top prospect for years, and you have Darren Ruff, who was not a prospect at all until last season, and now, is the big name, and people want to see this guy, and they're both going to get a ton of at-bats. I can guarantee you that. Both of those guys are going to play, I would guess, almost every day in spring training, especially since Young won't be able to play right field. You can put Brown in right, put Ruff in left, have them start almost every game, and they're going to get their shot. I mean, they're each going to get a shot to win a job, and then the Phillies are going to decide, I think, on how they look this spring.
Revere, to me, is the most exciting player in this outfield just because of his speed and his upside. Where do you see Manuel putting him in at this lineup?
That would be another question, too. I mean, if Revere has a big spring, I mean, he might press the decision, to put him in leadoff. And again, this is a guy who he's not a big on-base percentage guy. He does not walk a lot. His speed makes you think that he's the quintessential leadoff hitter, but he does not get on base a lot. And again, Rollins has that problem, too. Rollins is not a big on-base percentage guy. Rollins has more pop than Revere does. So naturally, you would think maybe it's better to put Revere at the top. Maybe he can steal 60 bases. Put Rollins down 5th or 6th in the lineup, maybe he can hit 20 home runs again. And I think that's something that if Revere, Charlie Manuel likes having Rollins at the top of the lineup, and he thinks Rollins is most comfortable there. But if Revere really presses the issue this spring and has a big spring, that could change things. That could force Manuel to finally move Rollins down for good.
And how about defensively with Revere? Are they positive? Do they feel positive about his defensive play?
I think they obviously love his range. I mean, he can get you a lot of balls, but the big question will be his arm. I mean, people have compared his arm to Juan Pierre's arm. It's not a very strong arm, and if you just watch any kind of video, of Revere, it's not a strong suit. But he does run down balls, and scouts will say that he puts himself in position to get to a lot of balls, and even he could compensate for the arm strength because he puts himself in a good position to field a lot of balls and is in the right place at the right time. So he'll have to rely on his speed to make up for some of the shortcomings there.
Matt Gelb joins us. Matt, a few more questions right before we let you go because I know you're very busy today down there in Florida as spring training gets underway. 5th spot in this rotation, 1 through 4. I think it's set if you want to pencil in who's where 1 through 4, but I definitely think you have your 4 starters in mind. Who's going to grab the 5th spot in spring training in your estimation?
Yeah, you'd have to think it's going to be John Lannon unless he has an awful spring. I mean, the Phillies guaranteed him $2.5 million. He was not in the Nationals rotation last season, mainly because they had 5 guys who were better than him. But this is the guy who used to start opening days for the Washington Nationals. And they paid him $5 million to pitch at AAA last season, which was an interesting decision. But he has decent career numbers. I mean, again, the Phillies were kind of spoiled by this 4 aces thing. A 5th starter, you're not looking for an ace. You're looking for a guy who's going to take the ball, every 5th day, hopefully make 32 starts for you. And pitch hopefully at a league average level. And I think John Lanning can be that guy. I think he can be the guy that pitches around a 4 ERA for about 32 starts. I mean, he's a very durable pitcher, hasn't had very many injury problems. But they have some younger pitchers in camp who could push him. A guy like Jonathan Pettibone, who had a big season, finished really strong at AAA. He's not the most overwhelming pitcher, but he's probably the most polished pitcher they have. And they have a couple of younger prospects like Adam Morgan or Ethan Martin, who probably aren't going to make the team out of spring training. But if they start out well at AAA, I mean, maybe they end up pushing them up if Lannon struggles.
And you see this a rotation. Everyone loves Roy Halladay, but last year it wasn't his best of season. It wasn't a terrible year. He did pitch to a high ERA. I would have to imagine that Roy Halladay bounced back here coming up this year.
Well, he'll be the biggest question. I mean, really, we're going to be watching his shoulder all spring, and I think it's something that we're not going to know right away. We're not going to know by the middle of spring. We're not going to know by the end of spring either. We're really not going to know until we get into the season. And he showed signs of problems last spring. Scouts had noticed it, a drop in velocity, drop in arm angle, and Halladay is convinced, and the Phillies are convinced that he's able to adjust and overcome the strained muscle that he had in his shoulder and his back. And he's the most interesting guy. I mean, because you're looking at a guy who was the best pitcher in baseball before that injury, and if you can acquire the best pitcher in baseball, without making a trade or anything, then you've obviously done something well. So he's the key. I think he is the key to this entire season for the Phillies.
And there's going to be a little bit of a different look behind home plate as Carlos Ruiz won't be there on opening day due to the suspension and everything. Eric Kratz, how do you think he'll manage this pitching staff this year? I know you have a lot of impressive names on that staff, whether it's Hamels, Holiday, or Lee, but how do you like him managing this pitching staff?
You know what I thought was interesting last year during the season is that as the season went on, a lot of the pitchers on the staff were really, really quick to come out and praise Kratz for the way he was able to adjust defensively and was really able to learn the staff, had a very capable mind for to be able to handle it. And, he impressed people with his power his first few months on the team. But I think among players, among people inside this team, they were most impressed with the guy's ability to catch. I mean, they did not know much about his defensive ability, and people were impressed by it.
Until Ruiz gets back, who's going to be the backup catcher for this team? Who are some guys that you're hearing of making some juice in camp so far for this backup position?
I think the favorites had to be a guy named Humberto Quintero. He's a veteran backup in the majors. He's been 8 years in the majors. A guy who can. He's mostly a defensive guy. He's not going to hit for power. He's not going to hit for average. But he's a guy who just for a month, they only need somebody for 25 days per month. And he's a guy who could step in and help Kratz a little bit if they need it. Maybe you're only going to ask Quintero if I make 3 or 4 starts in that 25-game stretch. When Ruiz is out, so they could look at him. They have a bunch of younger catchers in camp, but I don't think they're going to want those guys to start in the major leagues. They want them to get every day at bats in the minors to help their development.
Final one here as we're talking to Matt Gelb of the Philadelphia Inquirer, writes for them and covers the Philadelphia Phillies. You look at the NL East. I grew up in New York. I grew up as a big Met fan. I'll tell you this right now, the Mets, they're not going to be all that great this year. But you look at the Philadelphia Phillies, the big competition is the Nationals and the Braves. How do you like the Phillies ranking up against the rest of the National League East?
On paper, not well. I mean, you look at the two most improved teams in the National League, and you're probably thinking Nationals, and you're probably thinking Braves. I mean, both those teams got better. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And how much better, we really don't know. And the Phillies season depends on health. And on paper, if they have a healthy team, you'd think they'd be able to compete with the Nationals and Braves. But we'll see. I mean, both those Nationals and Braves, both those teams could win over 100 games. I mean, I think you're going to see people predict that. I mean, either one of those teams could win more than 100 games, and it's definitely a tall task the Phillies face. But they're not the favorites for the first time in about 6 years, and it's definitely different. It's a different feeling, I think, for people around this team.
Matt, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much. We look forward to checking into you again real soon. I appreciate it, my friend.
No problem, Zach. Thanks.